ladies and gentlemen. I know you are waiting to hear some of these issues, so I'll ask Kim Green to start this evening's proceedings. So, over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Cam. Researching this topic, it's such a broad topic, Lenswood and Forest Range and Lenswood, to get it correct, isn't that right, Joe?
That's right.
And I'm going to pick on one family, that's the Green family, but in doing that I came up with names that have been in the district before us, and I think any historical gathering should recognise the members of this community from the past. So I'm just going to read a list out, and I've named it a common, endangered and extinct families of the district. So Common, Common Green, Mason, Coulter, Stafford, Schultz, Plummer, Filsell, Flavel and Joyce. They've sort of got established in the district. There's multiple families of them, and fair chance that they will go on a bit longer. Then we have the endangered, which is the Caldecott, the Cumney, Collins, Norton, Fry, Pollard, Brock, Edwards, Hine, Copeland, Probert and Harris. They're on their last families. You know, and these people have been around for a very long time. So they need to, if they want to become a common name, they need to lift their game. Now the extinct one, now I'm sure I'm going to miss out on some of these, and I have missed out on some endangered and common. I've got the ones that just jumped at me. So we'll try with the extinct. Etherington, East, Giles, McLaren, Lindstrom, Townsend, Bennett, Benithan, Filer, Watts, Sharp, Hackett, Lawrence, Leaney, Rogers, Squires, Gadke, Brown, Baum, Biggs, Leslie, Marshall, Trenorden, Conran, Leverington, Mawson, Croft, Scholes, Rowley, Trevennan, Frost, Fulston, Hefford, Hales, Hewlett, Patterson, Doakey, Morris, Packard, Dalton, Smith. And it wouldn't be complete without Flint. So he was many of us, he taught us at school. So there's like a really good grounding of the people that have been before us and have made this community what it is. And I think we really should have an honour board somewhere where we can keep tabs of who's coming and going of the district. So there's quite a few names there that had a big impact on the district. So I'm half and half tonight. I'm half computer, and I started writing it up because I knew Joe would want something in writing. So the first part I'm going to read because it's a little bit easier, if I can remember the passcode, because it deals with a lot of dates. So being Green, so John and Cecily Green arrived in South Australia on June 24, 1838 with their 6 children as assisted settlers. John was a farm labourer and shepherd from East Wittering in Sussex. Now I went there when I was in England. It's not what I expected. I expected it to be like Lenswood. And it was like bloody Wollonga. Down by the sea. And then we had a drink in a 700-year-old pub. Now whether the Greens drank there, I don't know. I think they were quite straight religious. They wouldn't have had a drink at the pub there. When the Greens came, the colony was 2 years old and had 14,000 inhabitants. Yeah, so that would be a challenge in itself. They settled at McGill. 3 sons, William, Henry and George, held timber licences and worked in the tiers. We always had this argument, what was the tiers? That's all this rough country between here and McGill, all those big deep valleys full of timber. So they held timber, they were timber cutters living at Stony Creek. Stony Creek, Joe, is from sort of school up through Forest Range. So they, and look, there's a lot of places that were like shanties, so that's where they lived. So they were living at Stony Creek around 1855 when Henry married Sarah Brown. Now Sarah's sister Harriet married John Brock Fry. Now, I'm not sure if everybody knows who John Brock Fry was, but he was our leading educator in the district. And so he had girls and Greens had boys. That's why the Frys are on the heading towards extinction, because there was all these girls, but they came into a lot of other families. Henry and John bought section 28, which is the coal store block, which is just across the road here, of 30 acres in 1861. Now the going rate was £1, but they paid £2 4 shillings an acre. So you can always tell when the land was pretty good. It wasn't because that's not really nice land, but it had big timber on it, and that's what the companies wanted. Now there was a guy that bought land earlier in the district. Is one of the names that is still in the area is J.G. Collins, who bought section 5143 in 1853, and that's, you'd all know, as Dudley and Brian Vickers down the swamp, and the old house is still there. I think it's going to stay there, John, is it, the old house? So these are the earliest settlers arrived from that time. Most of that land was bought by timber merchants. So they would send the poor old labourers out there to cut the tree, but the merchants held the licence and sold it on. Henry built a hut 100 metres above the net. What is, do we call it the garage? Or do we call it the...
Well, just several names at the moment.
Yeah. The local dump down just above the shop. You all know what I mean. So up there is actually a patch of what I call black locust trees around the site. So Henry built a little slab hut there, and John, I believe, built one across the road here where the offices are, somewhere there. So the two brother-in-laws farmed that block there for timber. The difference was that John Brock Fry could read and write. Noel Henry, no, it was just X marks the spot. Yeah, so land was heavily timbered and bought accordingly to the value of the standing timber. So out of those three brothers, William, Henry and George bought land on Edwards Hill Road, what is now Joyce's Back Gully and Douglas's. He later moved to Summertown, so there's Greens over at Summertown. William bought the southern half of the Edwards Hill block, what was Harry and Bev, which is Harry and Bev and Bennett's. That's the trouble. Who's current now is, we'll know as Bennett's block, but they left the district a fair while ago, so we'll have a bit of that. But it's all steep terrain with good timber. Later, William moved to German Swamp, which is now the Swamp Road where his descendants remain, Kenny, Neville and Neil Green. So that side of the family goes way back. We're talking Henry's side. So Henry bought more land in Jerry's Flat, which is called Lenswood now, in 1878 and 1880. Henry built a better home named Holmvale, where the garage now stands. Henry and Sarah had 6 sons and 1 daughter. So they are John, Henry and William were twins, Albert, Robert, Frederick and Mary. Mary looked after her parents for a lot of years until they died. She was never expected to marry, but indeed she did 12 months after Henry's passing. As Henry cleared his land, he also worked occasionally at the goldfields in Forest Range, as well as digging up rock from his own quarry in summer to barrow along the main road to be crushed up to fill holes in winter. In 1865, a block, what was Abbott's Flat, which is up top in the Coal Store Road, 723 acres, was bought by Charles Giles from Grove Hill, Norton Summit. So that's just below the Norton Summit Hotel, and that was known as Giles's Station. In 1872 to 73, there was only a few huts and stockyards on the southern end of that, so it really wasn't developed that much. Poor old Charles died in 1893 and the station was broken up. John Green, the first of Henry Green's sons, bought the land there. He bought the first land in 1993. So that's what we'd call as Ross's block, and John building his home there, which we call Ray's. So did they have a name for the homestead?
I
So those that you know it is up that end. The other blocks were sold in 1898, so that's like 5 or 6 years later, And the Green brothers, who worked together as a business, Henry, William, Albert and Robert, worked together as Green brothers. They bought 4 blocks. So this gets a bit confusing because in that era, they always called their son after the father. So we basically, which Henry are we talking about? So this is Henry split his farm up, and Henry Jr. So Henry Jr. ended up with the original block, which is down opposite the shop where the old house is. And Henry Jr. ended up with what was my grandfather's block on Colston Road. William, the twin, who had George Schultz's house, which is part of Warren the Jones farm. So, and he had what was known as Probert's block alongside of Arthur's block.
You got a map?
Yeah, so you can see it does get confusing, but there was 4 blocks up there, and they all had a block down the bottom end here, and they also had a block up there in the station country. God, it's only, what, 2 miles up there, but it was full of blackberries, so it was really the wilderness up in there. So we had, Arthur had a block, William had a block, Albert, who lived up by the school, had a block, and his was Norm's or Graham Green's now. And Robert, who lived down by the garage, had a block, which is Roy, which is down there, which is my place now, and Noel's up there. So they all had these outstations where the sons ended up going. Frederick, he missed out. He owned land on the school known as Les Greens. So the Greens had this big centre down here and all these scrubby blocks up the back there. And we keep thinking it's pretty good land. But Dad said it was huge. It was, how do you clean out blackberries? And this is sort of like the turn of the century. So it was only being cleared of big timber, but the blackberries had got a real foothold, and he said they were terrible. Well, my dad said too that there was only a little dirt track going up Coastal Road. And if someone was coming up with a trap and the ladies were walking to church, so Mrs. Croft and Mrs. McLaren used to rip into Dad because the blackberries would be overgrowing. They had nowhere to go. They'd end up in the blackberry bush, ripping their stockings. And he said it didn't happen once, it happened many times. Until now, you hardly see a blackberry, which is nice, on the side of the road. So the Green men were good sportsmen. They played cricket, football, they loved tennis, some had their own tennis courts, and they were solid supporters of the Methodist Church, which was around at Forest Range behind Joanne, or the Splitters Inn. So that's where the first church was. So if they wanted to go to church, everybody had to walk or had a trap. Henry Jr. built a new house across the road, which is the old house you see down there, and that's called the Laurels because it had a big laurel hedge. And across the road in 1888, when he married Alice Stuffield, they had 4 boys and 4 girls. The boys slept across in the old house and the girls slept across in the new house. One son, my grandfather Arthur, took over his father's Giles's block. It was said that even though there was big trees gone, as I said, it was the blackberries that was the killer. Arthur dug stone out of a quarry on Gilgreen's land, which was now Tim Napstein's, right up the top of Coleshill Road. So he dug it out with a grubber and an axe in 1990 when he married Elsie Bishop. He was very proud of the stone he dug out of the hill and slid it down the road to his new home. Now I can't imagine. Digging one bit of stone would be bad enough, but let alone digging a whole house load. One grand stone, and I can still hear him now. He was that proud of digging this piece of stone out. It's 7.5 foot long. And you get that onto the sled and drag it down the road. Trouble is, carting down the road with the sled wasn't that popular. And the local councillor, who happened to be John Green, which is Ray's grandfather, took him to task over that. Art never really had a good word to say about John, especially imagine what a sled full of stone would be ripping up the road. Now, I did say here that it was said that John was a very, what was that word? No, I can't say that word. A very tough fella, and that's why the family moved him way up on top of Coleshill Road. The iron roof on Art's house came from the old green homestead down here that was at the Holmvale. So the old house still lives on in more ways than one. Arthur also had a bit of trouble back in that area when he lit a fire and it got away. Trouble is it went to Woodside. And there was a lot of what we call timber cutters cutting 4-foot wood for the brickworks and the mill, and I think Arthur had to pay some money out, so that was his claim to fame. My dad Bruce, who was the second child, was born at home in 1924. He went to school here at Lenswood, as nearly everybody went to school at Lenswood. And at the age of 12, he came home to farm. He said, I lost a lot of schooling because of tonsillitis. In those days, they didn't operate so much, so he missed school. He wasn't the brightest, he said, but he was a big strapping lad. So I said to Dad, what was it like your first job when you came home? He said, well, Arthur went off, and what do I need to do? Well, Elsie said, you better follow him. So they went out, and I said, what did you do? He said, Dad. Yeah. What about the horse? No horse. We dug. I said, when did you dig? All day, every day. And as a 12-year-old, I don't know, has anybody dug lately? Pretty blooming hard, and the hoeing's bad enough, let alone digging. And so he said he dug and he dug and he dug. And they had 3 acres of cleared land, and they made a living off of 3 acres, which I find quite amazing. So every year they tried to clear 1 acre of land. Now timber was seen as a real resource then. So they would cut it into 4 foots, or the big long poles would go somewhere worth some money. But he said, we'd end up on the cross-cut saw. And I think any of us would use the cross-cut saw, but the chainsaw was bad enough, but he'd be on the bottom and Arthur would be on the top. He said it was dirty, it was hot. He reckons the best invention ever was dynamite. Just blow the things up, it saves you cutting them up. But he said you'd have to grub the stumps out, you would dig fair way out there with the grubber, try to find a root and then chop it off. He said it was really tough. They put the boughs on the stump and try to burn them out. But they would plant Swedes and turnips in the new ground. He said that was fantastic. No fertiliser needed, no weeds, because the humus was still intact. And he said we went all over the district. He said Noel never planted Swedes and turnips. He said that was too hard work for Noel. So Dad and Uncle Don would go and plant Swedes and turnips. And Art would cart raspberries and gooseberries to Glennewan factory over at Houghton with the horse and cart in the old Kero tins. Kero tins being what? Modern day equivalent to 20 litre, but it's metal, and it was usually in a Kero case too. In other words, kerosene came in these things and they put the raspberries in there. Art said they'd always be jammed by the time they got it. But he'd take them over to Glennewan. They also ran a few cows for their milk. And so when Dad was a little fella, they'd have to take milk to school, but to drop it off at Mrs. Brockhoff, who was Clem Norton's place, and Mrs. Brockhoff was one of John Brock Fry's daughters, married Pete's ancestor. She was a lovely lady, Dad said.
Yeah, great-grandfather.
Yeah, he said she was lovely. She'd always give them some fresh cake or biscuit. But he said, because we had the milk cans, no one wanted to give us a ride down the road. And he said some of them miserable, and he did name the people. And I don't know if it was John. But he said, yes, wet, it's raining, and we had the milk bucket to drop off. No one would give them a ride. And he said when we went to school, the back blocks, so the back blocks being Edwards Hill Road, was where the poor, and I know some of the modern people now, Martin recognised it, but those people up there were poor. They had no social services, they had a lot of kids, and he said you could hear them coming, and there'd be 20 of them coming down, and not a pair of shoes amongst them.
Yeah.
And he said that was terrible. He said we didn't realise how lucky we were, we had shoes. But he said they were happy, and the little kids, grade 1s, would walk all the way to school. Some of the families, their grandparents looked after them, so they were pretty poor. Just aside to that, Roy Edwards came from up that area, and he worked for my grandpa when he first started work. And his first month's pay went to buy his first pair of boots that he'd ever worn. You know, we can't imagine that in this day and age, can we? And later Dad had a horse. And I said, what was a horse like? Isn't that romantic? He said you had to get up real early to feed them. And then you're going to have your breakfast, then you harness them up, and you go out there, because what you're fed, you've got to come out the back. And he said they always had a lot of wind, and the flies. He said it wasn't romantic at all. And he said that was really hard going with horses. He said you're better off just digging with the grubber. Anyway, him and Norm Green and Mostyn, they had a horse as well, so they ended up tag teaming. So the hill opposite Mum and Dad's house was pretty steep, so Dad had 2 horses going across the hill, and they ploughed it with 2 horses crossways. And he said the top horse was above the back of the other horse, was that steep. He said it was a hell of a lot easier than prong hoeing. In latter years they had a rotary hoe, so Mostyn had a rotary hoe and Dad had a rotary hoe, and they put a pulley block. So as one comes down, it's like a push and pulley. One goes up, one comes down. He said, that was fantastic. And they grew fantastic raspberries there. But you know, not every day is a rosy day when you're digging. So on really wet days, the boys, Coldstore Road, used to go out to Fox's Creek, which is out where the bike tracks are now. And he said we'd have the army coats on, they'd have the fox terriers, they'd have the guns, and away they went. They'd shoot him. I said, what they shoot? He said, anything. And he said, there are no kangaroos in that area. We've got more kangaroos now in this area than then. But he said, we used to, Jack Green was really good at whistling up foxes. And so there'd be Jack Green, his 2 boys, Colin and John, privates next door, Ron and Harris, Mostyn, Dad and Young'un. Young'un is my dad's brother. He was always Young'un. And he said, it was pretty good. It was pretty wild country out there. Then I think that got cleared in the 60s, Ross, I reckon, out foxes?
Thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, so all that beautiful country just got bulldozed into a heap down in the gully and burnt. One of the entertainments of the area was going to the pictures at Loby. And Dad said there again, a lot of this comes from my dad. And I was listening, he always tell you stuff, and how much do you listen to? But I listened to a fair bit of it. And he said it would be just like a little dirt track. So what's a dirt track around here? It's not the back road, it's a really narrow, it's like a little farm track, like your back track cam going up to your back orchard. Just 2 wheel marks. And it's dark, and they'd go to the pictures, have a lot of fun, and on the way home they'd stop at our Filers, which is where Graham and Annie used to be, and they'd had a radiogram. So all these kids from the district would sit out the front on the veranda and listen to the radiogram. He said, that's fantastic. I don't know whether we'd like all the kids from the district sitting on our front lawn listen to our radiogram. Anyway, later came motorbikes. The boys had the Bantam. I don't know if they were that powerful. Bantams, they were about a 90cc. Dad had a BSA 250. And gravel roads. So you can imagine Hoons, the Longwood and Dad used to go to dances. And it was always said that Don Green always got the best looking bird at the dance. Well, one night he's bringing her home, he tipped her off over on the golf club on the gravel. I think he went off the Christmas card list after that one. So the boys in that era, a lot of people, it wasn't apples. It wasn't the focus, it was timber. Timber cutting was the big focus. But as they cleared some land, they would grow fruit, vegetables, and then eventually plant tree crops like apples and pears, plums, quinces, a few cherries. Cherries all in steep country. But Dad and Uncle Don used to grow a lot of onions for export out of the state, WA, Victoria. And my earliest memories of the old TA-20 cultivating the ground, and you'd get a real fine tilth, and then they'd have a big flat board, so you'd sit on the back of the board as they'd level it off to get a nice, was that fun as a little kid. I'm going to stand there and we'd be off and on and roll over, but we grew a lot of onions. It was all hand planted and hand dug. And they might have planted 2 acres. Nowadays they planted hundreds of acres. But when they'd do a green manure crop, and that's the thing that I remember mostly as a little 4-year-old, I'm sure they were like 10 foot tall, but we'd make tunnels in there and cubby houses and would come down there and try and find us, because we'd be in there cackling like little kids do, and you can never find us. But the smell nowadays of fava beans brings back those wonderful memories. So the apples came along, and we had great varieties in those days. Summer strawberry, bunkums, Cleos, Johnnies, a few guys still grow Johnnies, Emperors, early and late Astracans, Hoovers, Pippins, Rome Beauty, Statesmen, Rokewoods. Rokewoods they used to send to England just on the open deck, on the ships. They still were hard when they got there. And I'm not sure you can say niggerjack nowadays, but that was another one. Or a maiden flush. What were they thinking when they named some of these apples? And of course then we got into the modern varieties of Golden Delicious, Grannies and Old Delicious. So sport was very strong community foundation in the district, and that was their entertainment. Backs of trucks, walking. There was the old cricket ground up here at Stafford's. But Dad he always talked about when he played, and someone hit the ball out in the blackberries, but people just kept running because they could see the ball but they couldn't retrieve it. And the local dance, there was a dance around the Mission Hall. Oh no, Dad and Uncle Don, I think, and a few of the locals got led astray, and they'd always have a few beers in their cars, in the boot of the car, and the policeman would come. You weren't supposed to drink with so many metres of a dance hall, so they were just across the ford, and the local policeman would come and join them. I've probably said a fair bit, but one of the things I'd like to finish on is that the school has been very important to the district. It's probably one of our main institutions that is left standing. So Jane's grandfather and grandmother, so Norm Cumnick and Florence Biggs went there, and Arthur, my grandfather, went to school there. All the Cumnick, Jane's dad's family went to school there. My dad's family went to school there. My family went there, Jane's family and David went there. My kids, David's kids, and now my grandkids. So it's put us in a really good place that there's been a lot of people go through the school and they've stayed in the district, and that's made the community that it was.
Now, Kim's giving a very comprehensive issue. I've been looking around and I don't see anyone taking any notes. I've seen one person taking some notes. Now, out of Kim's comments, there are a significant range of issues that we might sort of pick up as we go along. But for those of you who think, hang, the only people in this district are in actual fact just the farmers, that will carry on. You might have thought that the district's only made up of Greens. However, let me introduce Peter Brockhoff, who's going to talk about his family as well as other matters. So, Peter Brockhoff.
Thank you. I've brought a few bits and pieces along tonight. You might like to pass around while I'm talking. I'll speak to those after I've got a tad bit of a look at them. Basically, in short, they're just some things that I've dug up recently, bottles and so on. It's interesting looking at the early maps, the way the land was divided in this district, and one thing that stands out if you do that is to see a straight line that runs from Collins Hill Road through to Green Hill Road. And that was a baseline for a lot of the subdivision that went on. So the other property, of property on Swamp Road, backs on to that. And so a number of neighbouring blocks also run out to Swamp Road from that line. And if you look at those maps, you'll see similar long straight lines between there and the Onkaparinga River, which sort of indicated there were some pretty big pieces of land around in those early divisions. The maps also show much smaller blocks out over that other area called, Wollonga, that sort of area we don't really talk about because it's elsewhere, isn't it? But the point that I'm interested in is that the Otherwood block runs forward from there, and it has a mirror block virtually the same size alongside. The reason being that it was one block of two at one stage. And in that subdivision of those two blocks, the Otherwood property's got a waste. So instead of having two parallel lines from that baseline through to Swamp Road, it nicks in. And the reason for that was that in those days, it was really valuable that on one side there was a sand deposit, on the other side there was some creek wash gravel. And so that was equally divided between the neighbours. So a similar approach in that subdivision was taken to access to water. But for Otherwood, there was always a bit of sand and a bit of gravel, which had been used in the original building that Dave Brockhoff built early in the 1900s. Dave was one of the sons of the Brockhoffs living up at the Pines that Kim's made reference to, just above the old original school. He was actually one of the younger sons because Geoffrey, the older son, went off to World War I and was killed in World War I, and Dave took over that property, looking after originally for Jeff while he was away. So that property had been bought from Billy Pye's estate. Billy Pye's a name that pops up in Stringy Barks to Orchards, and you see a few references to him there. So I won't repeat what's in that book, but might add a few bits and pieces about Billy Pye. Billy was an immense man. He was a big bear of a guy. He spent his time maintaining the edges of the road between that section of Swamp Road and Balhana. So he's employed by the council to do that. But he was an educated guy, as far as we can work out, in that he knew how to play the piano. He would turn up to Gibbondale, which was the original Trevenham house, which was reputed to be the first solid construction building in the that district. Now, I don't know how big district means in the oral tale that came forward. It may have meant that just that section of Swamp Road, it might have meant the length of Swamp Road, I don't know. But it was a building that was built from stone and mud, basically. But it was topped by slate. It had a slate roof, which was most unusual and significant in those days. The box that's going around has got some remnants of that slate in it from that roof. The story about Billy Pye that isn't in Stringy Barks to Orchards concerned the fact that he had a cottage in Balhana and a cottage on Otherwood. Now, I think cottage is probably being a bit romantic. I think it's embossing the truth somewhat, because I remember the site of the Lenswood one, and it was quite small, so it was definitely a one-room place, lived in by a bachelor, so I can't imagine it had too many niceties about it. But Billy, being Billy, did things differently. If he needed a fire, then he lit a fire, but he wasn't that interested in cutting wood. So he had a hole through the wall, and he had a complete log, complete tree. And he'd get on the other end of the crowbar and stoke the fire. Push the log into the... I found traces of his rubbish dump below that site later in life, and there are only 3 or 4 items in it. So just a fragment of a plate, fragment of a bowl. So it was a very simple life that he was leading. But Billy was actually educated. He was a guy who was referred to as a remittance man. In other words, we'll pay you to go to the colony, don't you dare come back. So what he'd done, we don't know. But the family made sure that he stayed in South Australia by sending him money. The education that he'd had was possibly surveying or something similar, because he decided that there should be a track from the front of the rectangular rock-off property to the back. And so that was built on a gentle gradient. So it's possible for a horse to pull a dray or whatever fairly easily up to the back of the property where the better land was for growing veggies and so on, and then come back very easily with a full load to the front. In later life, he decided that, hearing talk of an Adelaide to Melbourne railway line, he decided that, well, that's a good thing. It should obviously go through his property, so he dug the railway line from the front to the back, going up to the steepest and highest part of the Adelaide Hills. And that bit hadn't quite clicked with him, I don't think, that he was going to take a train up to the top of the mountain and down to the sea. There are still traces of his efforts with a pick and shovel digging that railway line on that property. He also decided that the next gold strike was actually on his land. It was going to be the other side of the creek from where his property was. Therefore, there was going to need to be a swing bridge across the creek. So he built the start of that swing bridge. He put in 2 posts on one side and 2 posts on the other. They were so significant that the last traces of those only came out during my lifetime. So they went in before 1900, and they were a significant depth into the ground, something like 1.5 metres into the ground. And until bushfires went through in 1955, they were still significant posts down on each side. Slight problem, no gold. So he dug 60 holes on the other side of the creek looking for the gold. So when Dave Brockhoff started on that property looking after it for Jeff, the first job he had to do was to fill in some holes. In that process, he only ever saw 1 speck of gold while they were sitting down morning tea. He had others working with him, and he just saw 1 glint, and the other guy was able to pick up just a tiny speck of gold. And on the basis of that, Billy Pye was vindicated because there was a gold stripe on his gold. So Billy was quite a character and well known in the district in his time. And that physical activity is the sort of thing that the timber fellas and so on, that's what life is all about, the hoeing and so on. So, similarly, there's a history of timber on that property. The second half was actually, the section that was divided off, was actually a reserve for the Balhana Case Company. And some of you will probably remember the Philsall sawmill in Balhana. A lot of the materials for making wooden apple cases came from that mill. And I've memories of going down, delivering timber there, seeing this massive old boiler from a stationary engine that was sitting inside this shed and being stoked with all the offcuts from the sawmilling process. And so a cheap source of power for the sawing that went on there. Timber was, again, the 4-foot wood that Kim was talking about. It would be cut into 4-foot lengths, and then it would be stacked 1 cord long, and that would be a cord of the cord wood, and you'd be paid accordingly. So a truckload would be taken to the brick kilns, Loberthal or Littlehampton, and would be stacked out in that cord, be measured, and then payment would be made on that basis. And the wood would sit there for maybe 12 months to be properly seasoned before it was stacked into the brick kiln to be stacked in amongst the bricks to fire the bricks, which was a bit of an inexact science. So bricks would come out in any shape and form from something which was relied very much on the skill of the guys making the bricks. From that property, other wood, there was a lot of veggies and so on grown. As Kim's told you, the hand work that went in was specifically, well not specifically, but mainly for veggie growing. So one of Dave's problems was that he was sort of hitting his straps at that property when the Depression came along. So he's faced with the issue of how to feed his family that, although they kept trying, they turned out a boy and then a girl, girls amount to 6 at the end and 1 boy. So Dave had this slight problem that he had developed a large family, he needed to feed them. How was he going to do it in Depression time? So he had an old Rio truck. Rio was the initials of Reg Oldsmanville, the Oldsmanville cars. So Rio trucks were around and they had a good reputation. So I can remember this old truck with very low running boards, wooden tray, old round headlights, in its retirement, sitting under a tree. But in those days, there were photos of Dave with apple boxes stacked 3 high, everyone covered with a wet bag full of veggies and whatever he could grow. And he'd just get behind the driver's seat and head east. So he knew that there were guys out in the wheat country and so on doing just as tough without the veggies that he could grow. And so he spent many years just bartering. So he'd take the veggies out and he'd come back with whatever guys had. So sometimes it was pigs or sheep on the back, but it'd be chook food, so plenty of wheat and so on coming back. And of course that was traded off once he got here as well to other people. So it was just a way of sharing what he could produce, and that was the way society got by. Everybody producing something and just being swapped around. And I saw that in action. I saw many years later, Kim spoke of Roy Edwards. We knew his brother Bob Edwards fairly well down our way because Bob did a lot of timber building on our property. And as he matured, his pleasure in wiping up the frying pan with a piece of bread to get that last little lard sort of caught up with him. So he had to take life a bit easier. So he stopped working with timber again and came to Dad one day and said, "Look, I'm in a bit of trouble." He said, "I've been working, cutting timber, I'm owed money, haven't been paid, can I grow some veggies here?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So we only had limited water supply in those days. So Bob started digging and planting and watering and digging and planting and watering. Dad came in shaking and said, "How much is that guy going to grow?" He said, "It's not what he had in mind at all." But Bob was doing exactly the same thing. Once sweet corn matured, he disappeared. And he'd come back with Murray cod and a bag of oranges for Dad in exchange for the use of the water. And Bob was doing exactly the same thing as my grandfather had done a generation before. And he got through some tough times doing that. And housing was a bit the same too. Some of the early places around weren't so grand. I can remember Bob cleaning out one house, the floor had rotted out completely. And he had no problem with the dirt floor because he was used to that. But he cleaned up this derelict house and provided shelter for his family, just with pure muscle, because it's the complete reverse of today, where we can put some money in, some capital in to get a machine to do something. In those days, to go and buy another spade or another hoe was a big investment, but the labour was much cheaper. So we've flipped that relationship in producing stuff. It's so much more efficient today to go and sit on the seat of a tractor then doing that in previous years where you just sat on the horse or whatever wouldn't work, because you had to do the handwork. You had to get out there and do that work. There are many other things, plenty of memories. Saturday mornings would be in harvest time. I knew my place, it'd be up in the Lenswood cold store on the kneel boards on top of the stacks of wooden cases. Dad could reach up so far, filling his stack, his row of storage space with wooden cases, which weren't always symmetrical, so the stacks would lean and get a bit wobbly. About that stage, Dad would retire and say, I'll get Peter on Saturday. And so I would be put up on top of these stacks to fill the previous stack up to the evaporators in the old rooms. And we all relied on one another because the rows were wide enough to take a bushel case. You hoped the neighbour didn't lean over into your space, and he was hoping you to do the reverse. And so somehow those stacks stayed vertical. Case making, the original apple processing machinery on Otherwood was a wooden bench and a case hammer, which had a blade for splitting chooks, the boards, into the right size to nail onto the side of a box as you made your boxes ready for filling on the wooden bench. So that was the total mechanisation of the process. And then, of course, it moved on. We had bulk handling came into the district. Well, we moved with the times. We got a two-wheel drive Ford Dexter and a set of back forks. Just a slight problem, the forks would lift so high that the trailer truck was up there. So we spent 2 seasons, I think, loading the truck off the bank. So we reverse on, hope the bin landed somewhere about the right position and that we were still able to get the tractor out from underneath the bin. So the reverse of that was, how did you get fruit out of the bin?
Yeah.
So again, after school, we'd be going up to Ron Jones's shed to pack fruit with his David Brown tractor that had slight problems with the clutch and the compression. As the shed would fill with smoke very quickly, the clutch you had to be really careful on because otherwise the bin would go straight through the bin tipper instead of onto the bin tipper, and we used this old Harvey grader, which was a sizing system where apples went along a belt and came out, depending on their diameter, through a gap into individual bins. And that was a great improvement on where we had been handling all fruit by hand. The back of the property in Dave's day was productive, as I mentioned. And one of the reasons why it was productive for Dave was that rather than letting it be a swamp, he drained it. And to do that, he felled stringy bark trees, cut them into blocks about so long, and then he split them into parallel sheets of timber. And he dug trenches parallel through this piece of swamp, put down one block, put in 2 walls and put a lid on it and put the dirt back and grew on top of it. So he then decided to catch that water that came through the drain, and I've got a handful of photos over there. One of the photos shows him supervising. Dave was pretty good at supervising. Other guys digging out the dam by hand with a spade. So obviously it wasn't a very good dam. But he would drain that water into the dam, pick it up with a pump, push it back up the hill to a tank, and then let it run back again to operate sprinklers over his veggies. Then came the big day when he decided to put in a bore. So the drilling rig came. It was a winch operating system with a cable. So the winch wound the cable up to to the top of the tower, the pin which did the work would be dropped and it would punch into the ground. So after the first day's work, when the ground was wobbling and vibrating with every drop and the drill progressed 4 feet into the ground, Dave, who had a temper really, got out the spade, said, I can dig faster than this, dug down 4 feet to one of his blocks of wood sitting underneath. So he was still trying to punch through his iron groin. Being a bog, it was just floating. But they got there in the end. That was very handy. But anyway, there are many other bits and pieces that pop in, but I'll stop that one.
Thank you very much. You will have been able to pick up quite a few issues out of the addresses by Kim and Peter. We picked up quite a lot of issues that some of which most of us here really didn't have much to do with. But time marches on. And so our next speaker, Warren Murdoch, brings a slightly more modern aspect to our society. So thank you, Warren.
Yeah, thank you, Cam. Yeah, I guess what I have to talk about tonight really is a more modernistic version of the district, and how I came to be in Lenswood was the fact that my dad was posted as the headmaster of the school up here, and I arrived here when I was 17 years of age, and I was still an apprentice in Adelaide to a firm called William Esri and Son, and I was very fortunate in those days to work in some very sophisticated type homes, and even Downers was actually one of those, and there was a around Lady Tennant, a lot of those, and I worked as a carpenter with this Scotsman called Andy Dalgetty. Yes, and he taught me a lot. Anyway, as it turned out, I worked on a lot of building sites in the city, and I did fairly well, and I was actually a leading hand to William Esri's Son by the time I finished my apprenticeship. Anyway, I decided that it was a very old established company, so I thought, well, I think I might come into building up in Lenswood. So, and then there was Gadke's here, and then there was Harold Hoyner, and just forgetting the name, over at Charleston, builder over at Charleston.
O'Malley,
yeah, Clary O'Malley, and one specific person I can remember with Harold Pointer, and I guess a lot of you guys had some dealings with Harold, and Harold be doing this job and all the rest, and you'd look at the door and God, there was this gap here like that, and you'd say to Harold, gee, that doesn't look too good. He said, I say, lad, she'll be right. I say, lad, she'll be right. Anyway, as it turned out, I had a little shed when Dad was at the schoolhouse down there, and made some joinery and did those sort of things, and so I decided that I needed to further develop my skills, and as it turned out, I was mixed up in the CFS EFS in those days over at Kersbrook, and when I came over here to Lenswood, I got involved with the CFS here, and Bert Copeland was the president, and he was the president from 58 to 88. Anyway, Bert turned out to be a very important part of my life in this district, in that he said to me, he said, I'd like you to do, and I was a secretary treasurer, and this happened because of John Stafford. He decided that he wasn't going to be the secretary treasurer any longer, so I took the job on, And from 1962 to 86, I was Secretary Treasurer of the CFS, which was a really big part of my life. Anyway, Bert comes along and he said, "Well, I'd really like you to build this new fire station." And so I said to Bert, "Well, I don't think I can really do that." I said, "Because I really don't have the financial backing to be able to do that." So he said, "Look, Warren," he said, and I worked out a price, and I said, "I don't know how I can do it." He said, "Look, don't worry." He said, "I'll be guarantor for you as long as you need me to do it." And so I opened up the various accounts and had the design and actually got on to building the fire station. And mind you, that wasn't an easy task because actually got the land from Clem Norton donated the land for there. We had some difficulty actually in doing the foundations up there, and we're talking about blasting. Well, we had to end up blasting on the back left-hand corner there, and old Kenny would come along and set the charge and everything in there. And of course, we were really worried about what was going to happen on the house next door. Anyway, we did that, and ultimately built the fire station, and in actual fact that was opened in 1962-63. And as it turned out, after that, in various years afterwards, I actually built the fire station down at Cutley Creek at Kersbrook and Mount Torrens, and also some extensions over at Birdwood. So had quite an involvement. So obviously there was an odd few people in the district that were a little impressed with this building, and by the name of Ross Green came along and said, how'd you like to build me a house? And so anyway,
It's still standing. Right?
still standing.
You sound surprised.
And in those days, I wasn't very old. In those days, we had to dig all the foundations and everything by hand. We had to mix all the concrete by hand. Matter of fact, we had 2 little concrete mixers, and I actually fed the 2 of it, great heaps of gravel and sand and cement, and actually fed these 2 cement mixers. And you can remember all of this, Ross, can't you?
I sure can.
Yes. Anyway, we built the house, and we actually got the bricks from Little Hampton Brickworks, and so everything went well. And then subsequent to that, there was a couple of other local identities who decided, well, perhaps I could build my house. So John Stafford was up there, and so we actually built a house for John, and then my mate alongside me over here, Mr. Campbell Stafford, that was the 3rd one. And then there was Roger Norton's, and anyway, carrying on from that, we virtually built in Lenswood and Forest Range about 38 homes in this district. But so it was really our building business continued to thrive, and back in 1968 we actually opened up the building business down here on down on the main road down here, and we also had a hardware business which we developed, and that used the hardware business as a buying medium for the construction business, so we could buy quite a bit of the stuff in wholesale and then sell it to the construction company and make some money that way. Yeah, so building wise, we went on to build a significant number of buildings within the district, coal store, packing sheds, and the likes. And so when we look back over it, I think there was something like about 360 odd homes that were actually built in the whole of the district. So it worked out to be very, very successful. I did aged homes in Gummaraka and over at Loberthal, did theatre wings and upgrades in the Onkaparinga and the Gumaraka hospitals and 2-storey nurses' homes anyway. So it was really a very successful venture for us until such times that we happened to have a little obstacle, it turned out. It virtually cost us, in those days, something like about $100,000 when we had to go into voluntary liquidation. So anyway, as a result of all of that, the building and everything got sold, and unfortunately it was a company, so we managed to have some long service leave, etc., etc. So which enabled us to keep the building that we had down there. And so the liquidators, it was fantastic actually. They were too Rosh, and there was this particular guy called, and normally liquidators will come along and say, well, you know, bad luck, you know, this is the way it is. But he hung on for 2 years and assisted us right through, and finally got it to the courtroom door 2 years later. But anyway, but then we got into a situation where the building side of it was no longer, and also at that stage the co-op needed to do a development over here in their freezer section, so they used me as a project manager to actually build the freezer room and everything, and which turned out to be very successful. And so anyway, Stan and Bruce Plummer came along to me and said, why don't you get involved in irrigation, because they were starting to get these mini sprinklers and things, and they were getting from Wakery. So anyway, it turned out that I got on to Hardy Irrigation and became their distributor up here, and so then we went out and actually designed and supplied the irrigation. We'd have to go out with what we call an in-kilometre and a wheel, and every 5 rows of the apple orchard you'd have to go through, take the measurements and take the slopes and whatever, and it was all designed in a manner that was all done hydraulically, so we didn't have to use pressure compensated. It was all done by your pipes in various sizes, and yeah, went on from there. Well, that irrigation industry turned to be out fantastic in the orchards, and a big percentage of the vineyards in the hills. So, and we also then had a situation where they were getting in trouble with frost, so we actually devised a frost control system so that when it got down to a certain temperature, the pumps would start and all the sprinklers would work. And you'd say, well, why would you do that? You know, why? Well, in actual fact, what happened is, as the water was getting onto the buds and the vines and whatever, it would actually freeze on there, and it would act as an insulator, so it wouldn't damage the shoots and that at all. So anyway, that side of it was one of my important parts of this Lenswood district, and when we got into a situation there financially, you know, the bank said to us they weren't going to lend us any money, and they said, well, unless you turn over $300,000 in this in a year, he said, you might as well give it up. So we kept going, and there was one man here at the Bowls Club. He said, look, Warren, he said, if you need some finance, he said, I'll give you whatever finance you like, at no interest for as long as you need. Well, he was the actual person that actually got us to continue on with our business. And anyway, we'll leave that side. I'll just give you another insight in another section of my involvement in the district, and that's in this Bowls Club. Now, Bert Copeland was another, he was actually a very big part of it. He actually got me to the fence down here one day and showed me about bowls, and he really took an interest in me. He used to take me down to Norwood, and we'd play pre-season and post-season bowls, and anyway, the situation got to the stage where they needed a new clubhouse here, so I got the job of building this clubhouse, and actually it's over the top of the creek here. We had to put piers down on either side and everything, and actually it's still here, so...
It's a bit with
Yeah. Yeah, so this was opened here in 1986 by Sir Thomas Playford, and I started bowls virtually when I was 21, and so it's some I don't know 57 years later, and we're still here. It's been a wonderful been a wonderful thing for this district, and I'll tell you what, I'd like to have a few more of you people here as our members. But you'll notice up there the people, that the original people. Now we've got another important part of this, that this land here that the Bowls Club is on was actually donated by Cam's father, Alf Stafford, and he was one of the original members of the Bowls Club here. But it's been a great little club. You've probably seen around about the 1980s all the premierships and everything that we'd won, and yeah. So it's and I was fortunate enough to be a pretty good bowler, as it turned out, and ended up in the state second side. So anyway, I did talk about Bert Copeland there before, and as I said, he was sort of a mentor to me, and as it turned out, Bert decided, he was the councillor, and he'd been the councillor for many, many years, and he decided that he didn't want to continue on, so he convinced me that I should sit for council, and it was then called the Forest Range Ward. And anyway, turned out that Cyril Falston decided to put up for council as well, and anyway, the vote went through, and by all accounts I managed to win quite easily. So went the council, when Cliff Fife was the, wait a minute, yeah, Cliff Fife was the chairman of the council at that time, and then subsequently Roger Progoff. And from the time that I went into the council, I was made the deputy chairman, and I was deputy chairman for 15 years in council, and it was a great privilege to be the ward councillor for this area, because we managed to get quite a number of things done. And one thing in particular was that I spoke to the councillors down in Cuddly Creek in that area, and decided that it would be a good idea if we could extend the bitumen up from down at the sawmills down Harvey's, and we ended up in the council. We actually struck a deal with the Gummeraka Council and the Ongapringer Council, and the Ongapringer Council did all the machine work and everything, and the Gummeraka Council did all the bitumen and material side of it. So that's was one really great achievement in actually getting that bitumen down through there. I just got a couple more stories about the hardware down the road. You probably noticed that we were agents for the South Australian Gas Company for many, many years, and they approached us about becoming their agents after Dangles and Lotherthorpe had decided that they really weren't doing anything. And so we were appointed the agents, and the first year we started off with 22 customers. We sold 68 bottles of gas in the year. And that grew and grew like you wouldn't believe, and there were so many people that were disappointed in Canberra. In the car they went, they were part way up towards the school. I in there and I'm chasing them. I chased them up the road, and as I'm going up the road, they're throwing out footballs and tools and everything. Yeah. I managed to get them on the corner before the straight. You know the straight that goes down there? If they weren't going to stop, over they were going to go. You know, I convinced them to stop and turn around, right? They turned around and got them back as far as the garage, made a hullabaloo there. Grin and Thelma Kyers come out, and Davy Rogers came out, and old Davy had been doing some work in the shop there, and he came out and he got this hammer in his hand, and suddenly these guys decided that this wasn't all good enough, and old Davy went up there, he said, "You get out from there," and he Scotch accent, and he said, "I'll belt your hat off with a hammer." Anyway, the cops turned up, and dragged out, there was 4 of them that was in this car. You know, you'd wonder how it could ever happen like that, but
Maybe it was a dressing gown that.
it must have been. Yeah. Anyway, as it turned out, I got a commendation from the Commissioner of Police for my... Yes. But there was another occasion when we had another burglary there, and as it turned out, they'd pinched a whole lot of paint and a heap of stuff, which I hadn't realised that had happened. We found out the next morning that we'd been burglary. So anyway, there was 2 detectives that came. There was a Gerhardy from Mount Torrens and a Detective Cappy. And anyway, they turned up and said, "Look, don't be surprised that in probably tomorrow morning that you could get a phone call." And anyway, they had some information on what was going on, because they'd already had burglaries at Auburn and also in Birdwood, and a young lady in a store at Auburn had noticed that there was this couple with this child, and they'd actually gone right through and checked the place out, and turned out that she noted that what in actual fact went on, and anyway, she was able to alert the police on I think it was on a vehicle or something, and anyway, the cops had enough evidence from what this girl had noted to actually enable them to catch these people. So turned out that I got the call in the next morning, and at 1 o'clock in the morning, and said, "No, we want you to come down to police headquarters and identify your goods." And of course, we'd marked all the paint cans with a cross underneath when we did a stock take, so it was easy to identify that. Anyway, as it turned out, they arrested these people. As a matter of fact, they were out at Parafield Gardens, this couple, and actually when they arrested them, it was rather interesting, because they'd surrounded the place and all the rest, and it turns out that they were both in bed in a compromising position when the police caught them, and so that was an interesting experience. And we went to court, and I remember sitting there in the court place, and they're up at the bar, and this bloke's there actually making faces at us. Yeah, so there's just a little bit of history of my involvement. There's one thing I will say, that my involvement in this district, right from day one, with Dirk Copeland, people like Paul Hoffman, and the community where we went into irrigation, there were so many people that come along and said, "Doesn't matter what happened, we're going to support you business-wise," and they did. And without the people of the district as a community that supported us, it's been we wouldn't have been where we were today. And there's only one great thing about the houses, there was one built a house on Swamp Road down there, and I built this house, and I was single at the time, and turned out that this young lady was actually working in my office and built this house and got invited down there for a Christmas Eve function or New Year's Eve function or whatever, and
Cameras on.
and I guess it all blossomed from there. But when we actually got married, and her brother was there, and he said, "Well, he's the only builder in the hills that gives a living guarantee." So anyway, that's just some of my involvement in the district. But I've got to say that I owe a lot to this district. It's a fantastic place to live, and what I've achieved out of this district has been well rewarded by the people that live here. Thank you.
Without doubt, you probably are sitting there and thinking, well, you know, we've got these interesting personalities up here and they have all these stories, because, geez, as Warren was going through there, I thought, oh, I must tell the story, but for the issues of time I won't, but you'll laugh even more than what you've done so far. Because I guess there's all these little adventures and issues that happen in the community. And I know, look, that there are going to be happy times, and there are going to be times which are very, very emotional. And I guess that you can sort of think about those as you think about the life in the communities. These fellows haven't told all the stories, of course, but shortly we'll have an intermission. But before that, we will hear a different aspect from David Dominic in relation to his concepts of particularly emergency services, I think, but otherwise the other things. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, I'll be talking about CFS. I joined back in May '79, so that's just gone 39 years ago. Back then, we used to average out call-outs of about 5 to 10 call-outs a year, and of that we'd only have about, they're all fires, and then just a couple of things, like might be a car accident or something like that we might have to clean up. But basically that was our roles. So from that time till now, the financial year that's just passed, we've just turned over 53, which is about average for us this period of time. Of those 53 call-outs, we've had 2 fires. The year before that, 2016-17, we had a record of 115 call-outs here. And you probably don't realise we go out these days because we're all on a paging system, and very, very rarely the siren will sound. And so we're going out frequently, many times a night in storm times. And our roles these days have changed dramatically since the introduction of the emergency services levy. People don't do anything anymore. They expect us to do it. And literally to the point that if there's a limb on the road at 2 in the morning, they'll call you up and you drive over to the truck and you don't even notice the end. So that's how trivial some calls can be. And the other one is with the advent of mobile phones, is that can be burning off on the side of the road, you've gone home for lunch, and someone drives past the mobile phone, calls it in as an unattended fire. We have to attend because it goes through AAA. That's why our call-outs go up. The 16-17 year, we had 115 call-outs. We did not have a fire. Not one fire. So they're all pretty much storm damage, tree downs, false alarms, and miscellaneous other things. Where was I going with that? Oh, one facet of our business at the moment, which is growing, is actually rescues for the mountain bike riders down on the Fox Creek Road. We've had 5 this year, and almost every one is a helicopter lift. One we had recently was extremely severe. Cam was with us on that day, and we're not too sure whether she survived or not. Some of the accidents down there are getting very, very tragic. Helicopter landings down there is becoming an issue, and we've even had 2 or 3 winchings up through the forest to get people out, just in such a bad way. But most accidents down there, it's either broken legs, broken pelvises. It's pretty major. It's not a sprained ankle. It's pretty major prangs to have. With our training over the years, before CFS got very compliant with us, which we have to be these days. When Cam was captain back in the good old days, we used to do some pretty interesting sort of training exercises. As you're coming through the gate tonight, most of you probably would have walked over or walked past the stormwater cover just out here by the gate. Well, remember one year we gathered around there one summer's night and Cam goes, it was early December, his birthday's coming up next. Well, mine's in December. I said, well, that must be me. Righto, down you go. So I helped down into the stormwater drain and we crawled through, we're going to crawl through underneath the cold store in this drain. I said, well, pass us a torch. No, he said, no torches. So down we went and we crawled through that. I've done it about 3 times. And we crawled through underneath the cold store all the way through. It takes you a fair while. And if you're at least at all claustrophobic, you wouldn't get past the drain here. And it's interesting climbing through there when you don't have a torch, because you've got no idea what's in front of you. You know, it could be rats running around, you've got no idea what it could have been, there would have been. But you can probably also get a bit of a feeling of how the poor kids were in Thailand as well. On top of that, we used to run around the district, and as I say, it was not really in the framework of the CFS training, but we'd go and visit gold mines around the area, here, Forest Range and Birdwood and wherever. Yeah, if we got a hint of a hole to jump down, we'd find a hole somewhere. And that sort of led to another facet. We had a pseudo member. It's probably about the best way we could actually describe him. Quite a few of you know him, Brad Hanford. Lives down here at Cutley Creek, and he was in the SAS during the Vietnam War. Did a few tours of duty over there, and part of his role was he had to do a lot of cliff climbing. So he came up, Cam got him up, and he taught us cliff climbing, a number of us. Kim was involved with that. And we got right into this cliff climbing. It was sort of like it wasn't CFS, it was more of a social function for ourselves. We did a lot around here, Morialta, did a trip over to the Arapalis one year into Victoria, and down over into the forest of here. There's lots of cliffs down there. We abseiled down over the Peregrine Fountain cliffs one day, chucked the ropes over, and we're abseiled down over it, only to find out that the rope only just made it to the bottom. And that was a 50-metre drop. And then we had to climb back up again. Well, climb up around the edge of it. And on for that, Cam then talked me into doing a rescue course, a vertical rescue course over a weekend, which I did. One thing led to another. I ended up being a vertical rescue instructor for many years, and taught the local lads and to get them certified and such. And part of me doing the course, getting signed off on one of my levels was I had to do my exam down at the Bluff, and we had to. The scenario was a capable and conscious victim on a cliff face. In other words, a good cliff climber that's stranded on the side of a rock. So part of our training was that you never ever unclip off a rope, because the chances are that the victim that you're going to go and try to rescue is so happy to see you they're going to jump on you, and you can both hit the deck if you unclip. And secondly, they can be that excited to see you that they're uncontrollable, and you have to learn how to calm them down. And anyway, so I've abseiled down over the cliff, and it's windy as hell down there. That's on a calm down the bluff. Rocks and water's crashing below us, a long way below, and I come across my victim, which was one of the instructors, and he was dressed in white overalls, so we could tell the difference. Without me, I was thinking about how I'm going to shimmy across the cliff face to get over towards him, and next minute, without me knowing, he just jumped at me like a monkey. We're about 30-40 metres up off the rocks, and he grabbed hold of me around my neck and legs around my waist. And next minute, we swing like a pendulum across the face of the rock face. Well, this is pretty interesting. And in the process of me grabbing him and then holding him so then I can actually attach him to the lifeline, I've got a string of carabiners and descending devices on your harness. And with that, I flicked them up and smacked him fair square in the face. And opened him up to the lips. And there was blood going everywhere. And on his white overalls, he was covered in blood. Well, I looked over to the left-hand side, and that's the two instructors, John Thorne and Stuart McLeod. Now, Stuart McLeod was the state, this was through SES, the state training officer, and he was a Scottish fellow. I thought, oh shit, here we go. Here we're going to go with this one. I've just taken out an instructor. Anyway, I got him hooked on, hauled him back at the top, and all the fellas on the top, they went, what the hell's happened here? It's covered in blood, and he's there. He said, what did you hit me for? I said, well, I didn't mean to. You know, it's just one of those things. But I had to subdue my victim because he was too anxious and everything else. Well, I'll pass with flying colours these days. Talking about, Warren made a comment before about the station up here being built. I'm going to talk to you about knocking it down. We were waiting for Warren and the committee to make up their mind about building on the back. So we've had two build-ons. So we built the station, then we built on out the back there for a few years before going upwards. So we were heading out the back. Now that station sits on every single square inch of land that we own. There is no available land. It's everything. So we're going to go right back to the neighbour's boundary, Classens to the back. And so we waiting for the decisions to make. And remember Marty Fry, he got sick of this waiting. We were sitting around having a cup of coffee one night. So he went over to the rescue trailer, got the big sledgehammer. Without provocation, he just smacked a Besser brick out the back wall of the station. What are you doing? Well, got to get Murdoch on the way here. Got to get this building. So he started knocking it down. He got quite a few bricks out. Yeah, so then we took turns. At this stage, Cam comes back from the group meeting. He comes in through the door. He says, "What the dickens is going on here?" Well, we're just hastening up the process, you see, of getting this building organised. So we ended up knocking out the back wall of the shed and acro jacks and so on. But that was at the beginning of winter, so we sat there and shivered all winter. Still waiting for Warren to get his act together to build on. So in the meantime, we started digging out the back. So we dug most of that out by hand on Monday nights and Saturdays, busy bees and things. We've got the odd tractor and front end loader in there, but the Filser boys were members back then, and Warren was talking about blasting a bit of rock on the left-hand side. Well, that rock on the left-hand side continued right through to the back on the left-hand side. And we couldn't get it out with a pick or a crowbar and things, so Mark and Ian come around, and they had a powder monkey's licence, so they're drilling holes and putting a couple of plugs in there, putting carpet over the top and giving it a bit of a woof, and nothing much was happening. So this is on a Saturday morning, so well, we'll fix this up. So they drilled a couple of big holes and put bigger plugs of jelly in there, more carpet and more bags over the top to hold the rubble in. Well, they didn't quite time the fuses quite right, because the first one went off and it blew all the carpet and everything off. The second one went off, and then off she went. She had a fair dose on it. Well, it was a basketball-sized rock, came out of the back hole of the fire station. She landed on the back doorstep of Mrs. Classen next door. We're 6 foot deep in a hole, and I reckon two of us flew at that hole like bloody soldiers at Gallipoli coming out of the trench. Flew over there, grabbed the rock and threw that back down before Mrs. Classen ever knew. She never knew to the day she died. She could have walked out the back doorstep and gone hang the clothes in the clothes and she'd been taken out, but fortunately. But the station itself was showered in rock. There was rock in it. I think the rocks even landed out on the main road as well. But anyway, we got the rocks out and we ended up getting the fire station built. Thanks, Warren. We used to do some things that you wouldn't ever think that we'd do. And there was the Girl Guides always had a camp for a long time, probably still do. Have a camp for crippled kids down at the Oakback Racecourse. And the girls would have these, some were severely handicapped kids. I mean, really severely handicapped. Some were quite good actually. And we'd go down there on a Monday night and we'd cheer them up and we'd take them rides in the fire truck and they'd put our helmets on, give them jackets and that sort of stuff. And invariably they wanted to hold the hose, not squirt each other, and this sort of thing would go on. We did that for 18 or 19 years, and these kids, we got to know one little girl I can picture quite vividly. She was only about 5 or 6 or 7 years old, I suppose, when we first saw her. She was in a wheelchair, she couldn't speak, she was just severely cerebral palsy. And we'd see that every single year, right up through into her teenage years and things. And she'd know you, she'd know exactly where they'd be waiting for you to come down there. We used to love doing it. The only reason why we stopped doing it is they changed venues for whatever reason. Otherwise we'd be still doing it. And we'd always get a good turnout of the crew, didn't we, Kim? We used to do that.
And Ken Filser was one of the instigators from the Lions Club.
Was that right?
Yes, he was.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, those. And the Boy Scouts would have the boys the following week. So the Boy Scouts would have the handicapped boys, we'd have the handicapped girls in the group for them, and they'd have Balhanna lads who used to run with them. Some of the equipment has changed, some of our helmets and jackets and stuff, our equipment has changed dramatically in my lifetime. So, you know, when we started that, we had khaki overalls, yakka overalls, you fight here at the coral store, you take them home, mum would stitch on your patches and whatever that was required. You had to call out, you roll up with whatever work boots you had, and there were many times that you bought a brand new pair of work boots in the morning and they were trashed by the afternoon, so you had to go back and buy another pair of boots, whereas now everything's supplied by CFS. All our boots, all our equipment, it's all fire retardant, and you know, you walk through a fire and not get burnt. Back then, look, I didn't have a helmet for 2 years, but the wet towel hat did the job as anything else. But yeah, and the equipment of the trucks itself, you know, from petrol trucks to petrol motors and only pumps in the back, you know, there's nothing more frightening than in a fast-running grass fire and a stinking hot day and the truck vaporises and stops and you can't stop the truck and you've got a fire running towards you. That gets the blood going. Whereas now it's a lot safer with diesel trucks and everything else. So all that's all really good. I can remember a fire we had down at Corkscrew and we thought it was the top end of the Corkscrew, so we come in off the top side and Roger Lord was sitting beside me in the Willies. We're heading down the Corkscrew Road. There's a fork in the road. It sort of heads off to the left, but there's a turn off to the right. I said, which way, Rog? Left to right? He goes, go left. So I turned right. So I said, go left. I said, I know you said go left. But I said, I've got no brakes. And the right-hand road was sort of so we slid off up through there. We just waited for it to slow down a bit. Boys jumped off the back, squirted the brake drums down, cooled them all down. And then we got going. We finally got down to the bottom again. But then conversely, coming back up the hill, the truck would boil that much, you'd stop and someone would jump off the back and pour a knapsack over, cool it down, and eventually get home. But that was not an uncommon event. That was pretty common. To a point that there was a call out one day. It was about 1 o'clock or thereabouts, and fire was on the corner of Oakwood Road and Swamp Road, opposite Jack Mullins. Righto, first truck got going pretty quick, bloody big cloud of black smoke come up, and we knew she was a goer. Anyway, I waited for the second truck, and Ashley Giles rolled up. He was driving, I was on the back, and siren was still going, still waiting for some blokes to roll up. And John Rowley was down here at the coal store. So he wanders up, he goes, do you want a hand? Yeah, jump on, John, if you want it. So he jumped on the back of the truck and off and chuffed. Now, the pump on the back sat right at the back of the truck, and you had to wrap a rope around the flywheel and give her a pull to get her started. So I was very familiar with this truck, so I was on the back trying to start this, and hanging off the back of the truck, and you actually could he had a pretty heavy right foot. And we were whipping down past the shop, and that was pretty hairy, going around past the church there. I thought that was pretty quick. And I still couldn't get the pump going. And I'm looking at down the road, going down Swamp Road, I could see the white lines were about there. Then I went over there and I thought, yeah, we're heading down the middle of the road, because the truck had a 300-gallon fiberglass tank on it. It's exactly the same as the spray carts, metal spray carts around here. There's no baffles in it, so the water used to move a fair bit. And go around the corners, this thing used to rock and roll. It used to go like stinkers. There was a C1300 into that she was, but she was hard to keep in a straight line, as like steering a boat in the way. She'd be all over the place. And Ashley, as I said, he was moving along pretty quick. Finally, I'll get this pump going and going along. Next minute, coming around Brockhoff's corner down there, and Spuddy Johns was coming the other way, and he's got in the blue Holden wagon that he had. Ashley's coming down the middle of the road. Spuddy had nowhere to go, so he's off the road into Brockhoff's place, up around the bank. Well, he had a grin in his ear from Cheshire, like a Cheshire cat with his red beard. And as we sailed past, he had the arm out the window giving us a wave as we sailed on past, because he knew damn well, because he'd just come from the direction of the fire. So we roll up at the fire down there, and we fly into the paddock. The pump's not going too well. We were tempted to do a little bit anyway. The pump failed. Ashley gets out the truck. What's going on? Well, John Rowley's sort of getting his stuff together again, and he says to me and Ashley, he said, you bastards are mad. And he stepped off the truck and he walked home. So anyway, while we're there mopping up and everything else, we looked up, and from the eastern side was a black cloud of smoke came up. Hell, this must be up by Philsons, it's up on Deviation Road. And all the Onkaparinga group was in there. The Onkaparinga group consists of Lenswood, Labourville, Woodside, and Oakbank Bahana. And so we were all there at this fire, and those days the army camp used to have a fire truck, so they brought over a truck. So we left them there to finish mopping up this fire. And we decided, well, we better head to, up to the Deviation Road. Communications back then was almost non-existent. So one or two of the trucks went down through the Green Hill Road, down Swamp Road, and one or two came back up this way towards, and we're going to head up Collins Hill Road. But Cam said, no, I'm not going to do that. We're going to head up through Newlands place, which is now Joyce's. So we're heading up through there, and there's a lot of paddocks and stuff. And we're heading up towards the first gate. Greg Vickers is driving, he heads head out the window and says, I don't have a clutch. We're going to have to do open and close gates on the run. So he was on the back of the truck, jumped off, run up ahead, open up the gate, hope like hell it wasn't locked, otherwise we're going to go straight through it anyway. Open her up, close the truck would go through, close it and have to run and catch up the truck again. We did that about 3 or 4 or 5 times, I guess, up through there. You were on there that day, didn't we? Yeah. And anyway, we thought, this is bloody useless anyway, having a truck which can't stop. Anyway, we've got to get up to this smoke. You know, adrenaline's pumping pretty well. Head in the right direction, we get up the top there, get up the Bill Provots there, and Why's nowhere near here? She's at Ashton. It was children over, it was coming from the north side. Massive fire. Back in the day before aircraft. And we used to get big fires. So anyway, we head down towards Adelaide Labia Road, and Glenn Jules was coming up the road in his old common tip truck. And he had a big steel tank on the back, and just a dainty pump on the back, and Bevan Dalton was on the back, that's all he had. So we stopped and waved him down. We all grabbed a knapsack each off the back of the truck. These days, lads don't even know what a knapsack is, never know grab one. We all jumped on the back of the truck, and off we went, give Glenn a hand, and we left Cam and Greg Vickers with the old Willies to go and get that repair that Peter Cranwell's on the way to Basket Range. So off we go, we get to Ashton. By this stage, the fires started way down towards Norton somewhere, and she was coming up towards Monomeath Road, which is near the Ashton Hall, that intersection of the Ashton Hall and the old Masonic Lodge. So we pulled up in front of the Masonic Lodge, and she was ripping up through the scrub there. We thought, well, we're going to lose some houses here today, so it's not going to be a pretty sight here at the moment. So we, between about four or five of us, I guess, we did a relay on this pump. We had a minimum amount of pressure on this particular, just a little firefighter. But we laid on the ground in the scrub, and we just sort of kept spraying in the direction of the fire coming towards us, and we just kept applying water out there. And it seems like you're lying there for half an hour, but it's probably only about 2 minutes, and then someone come and tap you on the shoulder, and you'd go out and have a fresh air, and someone else would lay there for a while. And we did this until we ran out of water. Well, the fire stopped at us. On this part of the fire, we stopped. We saved all the houses and the old hall there, and what was Lovey Bond's shop and so on. And anyway, in the meantime, Cam and Greg rolled up on the truck, and it was only adjustment needed on the clutch. So that's fine. So we poled back onto that and did what we had to do. We got a radio call through. Well, this stage, it's getting very, very late in the afternoon. We got a radio call through. There's a fire at Murdoch Hill Road at Woodside. So all I could bring the groups out the area. And we're way over in Ashton, and there's a fire back at home base at Woodside. So we all started heading back this way like cut snakes. Somewhere or other, right on the driver's seat, I think Greg must have had to go home or something. It was probably a bad mistake. So, Roger's driving down the Green Hill Road. It's the quickest I've ever been down Green Hill Road.
The state of excitement was right.
Bingoes, it was quick down there. Jeez, we get out there. By this stage, we hadn't eaten. We only drinking a bit of water off the back of the truck, so we're getting a bit tired by then. But adrenaline's still running. We get out to Murdoch Hill Road. We round up this fire. All of us all get out there. And by this stage, it's getting very, very late in the night. It's probably 10, 11 o'clock at night, I guess. Who knows? It's getting very late. And anyway, the council came around. They had a little tip truck, a little 3-ton tip truck, and they had full of beer. It was like angels that come over the hill, full of beer and sandwiches. So we sat there and drank beer and ate sandwiches for a while. We were pretty happy. Thought, this is not a bad day's work. We're all totally exhausted. Well, someone obviously didn't like the situation that we went in and told somebody, and anyway, as of that day onwards, we never had a beer in the fire ground ever since. So that put an end to that.
That's probably a good place to stop, isn't it? So I thank you very much. Obviously, the district is fire prone, and we've seen these disasters. But you probably had your own family issues and concerns and troubles with your businesses and that sort of thing. So it's part of is part of life. But so thank you for coming along tonight and sharing some of those